How are you doing today?
I'm not doing too well. I don't know. I'm just not doing too well.
What's going on?
I got into a verbal power struggle with a student in my class, Jermaine Salters. You know Jermaine
Yeah.
well.
Well, let's talk about that because we know your goal is to work on fine-tuning your implementation of our behavior system. So let's talk about what happened with.
Well, we were actually in the middle of a lesson, a social studies lesson. We were learning about maps and globes, and students weren't supposed to be using ink pens. I needed them to use pencils so that way they can actually go back and correct their mistakes as they label their globe. So Jermaine decided he wanted to write with an ink pen, and I told him that he needed to put it up and get his pencil out, and he refused to. So I told him to move his color down, and he didn't. So I began to yell at him, and we got into a power struggle, a verbal altercation, and I just don't feel good about it.
So what I'm hearing you say is that Jermaine didn't follow the direction that you gave him about what writing utensils to use, and then you became upset, you yelled. What about the color? Was anything done with his color?
Well, I wanted him to move his color down, but he refused to. So after about maybe 30 seconds of engaging in an argument with him, I moved his color down.
Okay. So what is something that you think you did well in that situation?
I didn't do much well, but one thing that I do think that I may have done well was the fact that I issued a consequence when I saw that I had a student who wasn't willing to follow the rules.
Yeah, so I noticed that you're very consistent with the color system, and I think you should continue doing that. Like, we've been taught the behavior, there's a behavior, that there's a color that corresponds to that behavior. So you're doing a great job of making sure that you issue a consequence and move students down based on their behavior, and being, emotionally constant with that. So what's something that you think you can do even better in that situation?
After taking the time out to actually do a self-reflection on it and feeling so horrible about it, one thing that I do think that I could have done better was the fact that maybe I shouldn't have asked him to move the color down. Maybe it's just something that I should have done immediately and then moved on from it. So that's one thing that I think I may have been able to do differently.
So you're saying that maybe you shouldn't have had him move his color down.
Yeah, it just became a power struggle, and I think that things began to go completely left or completely in the wrong direction once he decided not to get up and move his color down. He didn't want to do it, and I think that's where the power struggle actually ensued.
And you mentioned earlier something about you being frustrated and yelled, and
Yeah.
he was probably feeling frustrated as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's brainstorm some possible options for how you can deal with that in the future, because you do want to continue to build relationships with him. So what's something that you would like to try and do differently when issuing him?
Well, aside from actually when issuing a consequence, okay, so aside from actually moving the color down myself and keeping things moving, I should have known this, but now actually in hindsight and actually thinking back to it, Jermaine's the type of kid who, if you speak to him a certain way, you're more likely to get more of a positive reaction out of him. And addressing things within such a public manner probably isn't the way to go, Jermaine. I think instead I could have walked up to him and actually whispered in his ear and gave an explicit direction and issued a consequence and told him that just because you're being moved down doesn't mean that you have to stay on this color. If I see you working hard, you have the opportunity to actually advance back up the color system.
So one option I hear you saying is having a private conference with him,
Yes.
privately issuing his consequence. Okay. What's another option for issuing a consequence?
To issue the consequence and maybe move on, depending on the time of day, or depending on the part of the lesson that I'm in and just the amount of time that we actually have.
So moving on, not lingering in that.
Not lingering, yes.
Got it. Okay. So what limitations do you see with you having a private conference with him?
Time is of the essence, especially within our 45-minute blocks. It takes time, and it kind of disrupts the flow of the lesson when I have to actually go over to Jermaine and one-on-one explain to him a one-on-one conference with him as far as a consequence is concerned.
Okay, so I'm hearing you saying just time, you have a whole class and just spending time with him. What about the moving on, like issuing the consequence and just moving on? What do you think would be a limitation of that one?
He won't get a chance to process what it was that may have taken place, and it may take longer for him to de-escalate if I just issue the consequence and move on. So looking at the two, maybe it would be a better idea for me, even though it's a more time-consuming idea, to actually go over and just have a 5-second conference with him. And I think that will in turn actually save me more time in the long run, because I'll have the opportunity to de-escalate him a whole lot quicker.
Okay, great. So we can practice that today. So you're going to practice going
Yes.
and having the individual. Okay, so I'll be Jermaine, and I'm going to be using a pencil. I'm sorry, a pen, right? And
Yes.
you want me to use a pencil. I don't follow it. You need to give me a consequence. Let's practice what you
Yes, no
say.
problem. Okay, so today, class, we're learning about maps and globes. Right now, I need everybody writing with a pencil. Nobody should have their pen out at this point in time. Jermaine, could you do me a small favor and place your pen away and take out your pencil? Jermaine, I ask you to please put away your pen and take out your pencil. I'm going to have to issue you a color change. But just because you're on yellow, it simply means to slow down and think. You don't have to stay on this color. But if I observe you following directions, you'll get a chance to move back up. Thank you, Jermaine.
Okay, so what do you think would go well with that scenario?
I think that it would allow him the chance to clearly see what it is that he's doing and visualize ways that he could actually correct his behavior.
Good. And it was such a positive framing. Like,
Thank
if I
you.
was Jermaine, I would feel like I need to do this, and then I can move up because I'm fixing my behavior, so my color's going to move up.
Okay.
So I think that that'll be a good way, you know, to start thinking about how to rebuild that relationship with him using that private
Good.
consequence.
Well, thank
Any
you.
suggestions? I mean, any questions or concerns about? anything?
None. I'm just excited about the opportunity to get a chance to put these things into action and just to address things in a different manner, because I don't want to feel horrible
Yeah.
about the way I address a student ever again.
I'm excited to hear about how this goes. Thanks for meeting.
No problem. Thank
Okay.
you. The door's over there.